Welcome. I'm so glad you're here to help us kick off the first evening of our special event, The Gifts of Your Third Act. Over the next 4 nights, 20 energizing, passionate experts are going to come together and share their stories and their wisdom and lead discussions and breakout sessions to join us. It's our hope over these 4 nights that you'll walk away with tools and ideas that can help bring you more clarity and courage and optimism that'll sustain you through this overwhelming time we're in, and also help you to embrace the years and decades ahead in your third act. I am so excited to have Ashton Applewhite here kick off our event series, and then John Geraghty and Betsy Small-Campbell will lead some very energizing breakout sessions. Ashton is the author of an empowering book entitled This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. She's an internationally recognized expert on ageism. She speaks wildly at venues such as the TED stage and even on the floor of the UN. She's written for Harper's, The Guardian, the New York Times, and is the voice of Yo, Is This Ageist? You can ask her more about that later. She's also the co-creator of Old School, which is a clearinghouse of really carefully vetted resources and other tools to help educate people about ageism and to help dismantle it. She's a leading spokesperson for the emerging anti-ageism movement, and she is a very exciting, energizing speaker. So I first discovered Ashton by watching a TED Talk she did a few years ago called Let's End Ageism. I've since read her book, and I regularly use her clearinghouse for my own work. And I'm just so grateful that you've joined us here.
Thank you. It is great to be here. And it is indeed, this is an excerpt from the new talk, but I'm thrilled that y'all are here to listen to it. Thank you for showing up. I want you to start by thinking about the early messaging around COVID-19 back in March, which to me seems like a lifetime ago. The message, don't worry, it will only infect the old and the ill. Remember that? That is why some countries deplorably deemed the threat, quote, less worthy of the best efforts to contain it. That's according to the head of the World Health Organization. So here's a thought experiment. What would the numbers look like? We're approaching 1 million. 1 million is now dead. What would the numbers, the unemployment rate, infection rate, mortality rate, pick a number, look like if we had known from the beginning that young and healthy people would also be struck down? Very different. That is the lethal, global, measurable impact of ageism and ableism, seeing older and disabled people as less valued members of society. The slide shows the very narrow definitions, dictionary definitions of ageism and ableism as discrimination and prejudice on the basis of age and of disability. A more complicated but more accurate definition is to think of them both as systems of belief and social practices that assign value to human beings based on assumptions about how our brains and bodies work and how that might affect what we are capable of. Ageism and ableism are upheld by the belief that being non-disabled is normal and that leading meaningful, desirable lives means staying youthful, able-bodied, and able-minded. I'm talking about ageism and ableism today because not enough other people are yet. I'm talking about them because I've watched the Black Lives Matter movement center the most marginalized, creating the Black Disabled Lives Matter hashtag in 2016. Between 1/3 and 1/2 of all people killed by the police have a disability. And supporting a march for Black trans lives in Brooklyn this June. I was one of the 15,000 people who joined, and I will never forget it. And for me, that's saying something. So just as we are not going to dismantle racism without confronting sexism and homophobia and all the rest, we are not going to dismantle ageism without confronting ableism. I'm talking about ageism and ableism because everyone is old or future old, and if you have yet to experience a disability, you will. No one gets a pass. It doesn't take much head scratching to figure out that much of our fear about aging is actually about how our minds and bodies might change as we move through life. That's not ageism, it's ableism. It's not actually about age. Plenty of youngers live with disability and plenty of olders do not. We are being ageist anytime we judge someone on the basis of how old we think they are, and ableist when we judge them on the basis of how we assume their minds or bodies function. We're being ageist and ableist when we attribute capacity or incapacity to someone based on their age. I stop blaming my sore knee on my age because my other knee doesn't hurt and it's just as old. When people in retirement communities don't want walkers cluttering up the living room, the dining room, or the front hall, I've heard about that, like get them out of the way, they are being ableist. When people who support community living for young people with disabilities think nursing homes are fine for old people with disabilities, they're being ageist. If an employer is reluctant to hire an older person because they might retire soon, it's ageism. If it's because the person might require special accommodations, it's ableism. When an acoustic neuroma destroyed most of the hearing in my left ear, I caught myself thinking, well, at least it's sexy brain tumor deafness instead of sad old person deafness, making me both ageist and ableist. So is the title of this talk, Still Kicking, although at least it's on purpose. Using still to modify an ordinary activity like working or driving is an ageist habit because why would people stop? It's ableist because why sort people according to whether or not they can kick? Everyone is ageist and everyone is ableist. No judgment, but we need to know what we're up against. Nobody's born biased, but attitudes start to form in early childhood around the same time as attitudes towards race and gender. From childhood on, we are barraged by messages about how awful it is to grow old and how tragic it is to be disabled. It's easy for these messages to become part of our identity, usually unconsciously, and they distort our sense of self and our place in the world. That is internalized bias. We olders can be the most biased of all because we've had a lifetime to absorb these messages and most of us have never stopped to challenge them. Internalized bias is the reason so many of us try to pass for younger or attempt to conceal a disability or are offended by the polite offer of a seat on the bus. All these behaviors are ageist or ableist or both. We all do them, no judgment, but we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it. And these behaviors aren't good for us because they're rooted in shame about things that shouldn't be shameful. And also, from a structural point of view, they give a pass to the discrimination that makes those behaviors useful. Internalized bias is the reason many olders refuse to use wheelchairs or walkers, even when it means never leaving home, because the stigma, right, is so great, they're ashamed. And cognitive impairment is even more stigmatized. This stuff runs so deep that we tend to act as though old people don't become disabled and disabled people don't grow old, which is of course ridiculous. And an ageist and ableist culture gives us cover. It is scary to think about physical and cognitive impairment that might lurk in our future. And you know, some part of your body is going to fall apart. That is inevitable. Cognitive decline is not, but stuff stops working as well physically. It is of course wrong to equate aging and disability. We age at different rates, physically, cognitively, socially, but the longer we live, the more different from one another we become, and the less our chronological age reveals about us. But disability and aging overlap in ways that are important to learn from and build on. When we ignore that fact, we rule out collective advocacy and we reinforce dual stigma. I may need help getting around, but at least I'm not in a wheelchair. I may be disabled, but at least I'm not old. Like a not yet 40-year-old friend of mine who broke a bone in her foot, who chose crutches instead of a cane because crutches signal injured, not old. That's how prejudice works. It frames the other group as lesser than ourselves, as alien, right? What we think of as other than ourselves. But olders and people with disabilities are not other, they are us or future us. If you have yet to experience disability, you will, unless you die young. Young people have created joyous, ingenious, creative communities, many of whose members celebrate interdependence and identify proudly as disabled. I am who I am because of my disability, not despite it. Disability pride. In a culture that fetishizes physical and cognitive prowess, that's an incredible achievement. Think what we olders could learn from them about asking for help, getting rid of this whole putting independence on a pedestal, right? That does us no favors. I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A too. So think what we could learn from them about asking for help without shame, adapting to impairment and age pride. And let's think too about what they could learn from us. Let's get interdependent. If that's a hard idea to get your head around, think where the aversion comes from and what purpose it serves. As author and educator Amos Wilson wrote, if you want to understand any problem in the US, focus on who profits from it, not who suffers from it. Mm. Quote, somewhere on the edge of consciousness, there is what I call a mythical norm, which each one of us within our hearts knows, that is not me, wrote poet and activist AUDRE LORDE. In Western culture, this norm is usually defined as white, thin, male, young, cisgender, straight, and abled. Prejudice works to advantage people who conform to that supposed norm and to shame and silence those who fail. Why on earth should waking up a day older or being different in big air quotes around that, be something to be ashamed of? There is no ideal. There is no norm. Systemic discrimination is a formidable obstacle, as we see from resistance to the Black Lives Matter movement. But systemic discrimination is real, which makes it easier to tackle than something non-existent. The imaginary failings that these systems created and need us to believe in. We are not broken. We are not special. We are not lesser. We are perfect. Quoting AUDRE LORDE again, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't lead single issue lives. Excuse me. I love that. No such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't lead single issue lives. Disability has been used throughout history to justify unequal treatment, not only of disabled people, but of African Americans, of women. We're so hysterical, right? We can't actually be competent. Minority groups and immigrants. We can't dismantle ableism or ageism without dismantling racism and sexism because they inform and depend on each other. Activism itself is intersectional. When we confront any prejudice, we chip away at the fear and ignorance that underlie them all. There's a wrong-headed tendency at play here, this deep-seated suspicion that if we support one group, it has to come at the expense of another. But working towards equity is the opposite of a zero-sum proposition. When we create circumstances that enable the most marginalized to participate and contribute fully, everyone benefits. That's the curb cut effect. Ask me about that too. 11 minutes is not long. This is only zero sum if we all die young. All of us lucky enough to grow old, which is a privilege denied to many Black, brown, and disabled people, will age into impairment. People age well not by avoiding chronic illness and disability, but by adapting to them. These are powerful, generative processes that unite us all and inform what it means to be human. We are as diverse as it gets, all races, all genders, all backgrounds. Each of these variables shapes our circumstances, and every person's experience is unique. My friend Peter says, I'm not blind the way anyone else is blind. I'm not 68 the way anyone else is 68. And the longer we live, again, the more different from one another we become. Sometimes I think if I could put just one fact in the head of every person in the world to challenge their ageist thinking, it would be that. We tend to think of difference as something to overcome or overlook. It makes us kind of nervous sometimes, right? That's why people say things like, I don't see you as disabled, or you're ageless, or I'm colorblind. Instead, let's acknowledge and embrace our differences and tap into what they can offer: delight, surprise, perspective, and power. There are billions of us. 15% of the world's population has a disability, and I think that number is low. Half of us are no longer young. Our numbers are growing. Medical advances mean that more disabled people are reaching adulthood and beyond. A new wave of COVID survivors are facing disability for the first time. All over the world, people are living longer. Population aging is a permanent, global demographic trend that represents a triumph of public health. We are not going to make the most of those longer lives without confronting ageism and ableism in the world around us, starting between our ears. Nor will we be as effective as these turbulent times demand. And when we come together across difference, we dismantle prejudice in the process. We create new ways of seeing and behaving. We have to accept and ideally embrace the bodies we were born with and the way they change over time. We do not have to accept being discriminated against that because of it. So I hope you'll agree and join forces against both of these forms of oppression and, of course, all the rest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashton. So before I open it up, though, to your questions and discussion, there are a few things that I really wanted to make sure we gave you an opportunity to share. The first is probably in the minds of a number of people in the room is, what led you here? You know, tell us a little bit of your backstory and personal story and how you ended up not only being a speaker, but really an activist in the anti-ageism movement.
Well, God knows, have never had a plan. If you told me 15 years ago I would be fascinated by aging, I would have said, why do I want to spend my time thinking about something yucky and depressing? But I started looking into it because I was afraid of getting old. And I'm kind of a bull by the horns kind of girl. It's not surprising that I'm an activist because I kind of charge at things. But I had zero interest in public speaking. I don't have an ounce of the performer in me, but nor did I aspire to being a writer, but these ideas feel important to me. And what happened when I started researching longevity and talking to older people was that I learned in what, honestly, I really think it was a matter of weeks, if not months. The same facts I started my TED Talk out with, you know, that it's not that our fears about aging aren't real. I am no positive aging Pollyanna. It's that they are so out of proportion to the reality. And I just became obsessed with why so few people know the other side of the coin, right? Both sides of the story. And the reason in brief is that if aging is framed as a problem, we can be persuaded to buy things to fix it, air quotes around fix, or stop it. Good luck with that. And if natural changes are pathologized, then we can be persuaded to buy things to cure it. Aging is not a disease, or living would be a disease. So I got a big bee in my bonnet and was off and running.
So share with us a few of those, call them misperceptions or accepted truths that are not truths. I would love to hear a little bit more about some of the stats.
Gosh. I mean, all stereotypes are false, of course, and misinformed. But I would say, the mother of all stereotypes, which I touched on in my talk, is this idea that old people are alike. That we wake up old one day and become the elderly, and when nothing could be further than the truth, right? The older a person, the less their chronological age says about what they're capable of cognitively, socially, or physically. That older people are incompetent, that older people don't have sex, that older people aren't curious. I mean, in the workforce, that people aren't creative or aren't curious. There is not one of those myths is substantiated in any way. If you are curious when you're 17, you're going to be curious at 77. You may not have the money or the body to go out running around doing the things that you used to do to satisfy your curiosity, but you will find other ways to do them. We find ways to do the things that matter the most to us, even if we have to do them in different ways than we did when we were 17. And honestly, with a lot of things, I'm a lot better at them and have more fun at them than I did when I was 17. Although there's things that I miss too, there's two sides of it, but most of us get better at stuff.
Talk a little bit too along this same track about, we call it the mind-body connection and the association with the negative associations with aging that are in all of us and how that hurts us.
Yeah, I mean, again, some of the fear is just human, but we are learning. There's just tons of really interesting research, more of it all the time, that shows how attitudes towards aging affect how our minds and bodies function at the cellular level. And I should say, I have been, I mean, all this stuff is in the book, but I've also been writing about this for free and accessible to anyone at thischairrocks.com is my website. And if you click on blog, then and search for, ableism or dementia or whatever the thing is, you can find short posts on the subject. People with, and I don't say a more positive attitude towards aging, because that sounds like you're sort of whitewashing it, or gray washing is actually a word. It's not happy talk. People with a fact rather than fear-based attitude towards aging live longer, 7.5 years longer. They walk faster. They are less likely to, they heal quicker even from severe disability. And my favorite study, and this is out of Yale, Rebecca Levy is the scholar who's done so much wonderful work around this, shows that people with a fact rather than fear-based attitude are less likely to develop dementia, even if they have the gene that predisposes them to the disease. And the researchers think that it is the stress of in the anxiety, which frankly are a result of our internalized ageism and living in an ageist world, that make us more vulnerable to exactly what we fear.
Oh, that's powerful. Wow.
Yeah.
Something to really internalize.
Right. I mean, to me, it's a huge justification for an anti-ageism campaign here in the US, which the World Health Organization is doing. They are releasing a global anti-ageism public health campaign. It's not the World Old People Organization. They want older people to be healthy. And I just peer reviewed their paper, and they realize that combating ageism is the most effective way we can do that.
Wow.
I mean, maybe not the most effective, but an incredibly important component that plays a part in every other piece of the puzzle. Whether, we need jobs, we need decent pay, we need to be respected, women need equal rights, etc. But ageism plays a really important piece in how we see each of those issues and those arenas.
You mentioned this, the World Health Organization's campaign. Can people find out about a lot of these things on the clearinghouse, your old school clearinghouse?
Oh, sure. Yes. I created the clearinghouse, which is old school. Oldschool.info is the website, because movements need tools. And I like to point out it's growing really fast. We just got a grant, which is nice. So we're about to expand our horizons. And one of the newer sections is a campaigns section. The campaigns section is evidence that a global movement to end ageism is underway. But there's also videos and workshops and, books, all sorts of stuff. So I urge you, if you're interested in ageism, to just go noodle around. Everything on the site is free, except the books. If you need something and you don't see it, make it and send it in to us. Because we want to build it into a place where people who are active can find each other and collaborate.
I personally was very inspired the first time I saw your TED Talk, so that's something else I suggest people tune in for. But I also just appreciate your call to action this evening, and I think you've given a lot of food for thought for us, not only personally for our own lives and our own health and the way we perceive our own aging process, but also just to see ways that we might be able to help in some way.
Even if all you do is look a little bit at your own attitudes, how you use the words old and young. Do you blame? The sore knee thing. Is it really age? Sometimes it is, but we default to age as a reason or an excuse when we might be, I'm too old for that. Maybe you're too lazy for that. Maybe you're too smart for that, right? Maybe you're too experienced, but try and think of whether you're actually using age as a placeholder for a positive or negative specific thing that doesn't have much of anything to do with age, actually.
There are a couple of questions. I want to spotlight a couple of people who have questions. The first is Tori McMillan, who has a really fascinating question and thought to share with you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, friends. It's great to see you. And Ashton, this has been really, really interesting and compelling. I'm wondering, what do you see as the most transformative way to dispel things like ageism and ableism? You know, Hollywood movies, TV shows that appeal to all ages. I mean, what really changes minds and behaviors about that? And then do you have some role models that we can look up to who have really dispelled? Because, you know, when we look at some of these political leaders, we're seeing way too many of them right now. Well, get them out of there.
Yeah, but get them out of there because of what they think and do, not because of their age.
No.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, I have a whole post. I'm like, here we go again with too old to be president or too old to be whatever. Wrong argument. So exemplars, and what could we do? Well, the most important thing you can do is to look at your own bias for starters. It's the hardest part and the most uncomfortable part, but it's the necessary starting point because all change starts within. I didn't make that up, but it's true. I think the, you know, consciousness raising was the tool that catalyzed the women's movement, because women came together and compared notes and realized that what they had been thinking of as personal problems were in fact widely shared political problems that required collective action. And that change in awareness is the linchpin of movement building. And on Old School, or on my site, because I wrote it ages ago, is a guide to starting a consciousness raising group around age bias called Who Me? Ageist. So I really recommend doing so. I also, and we're about to put one out on the intersection of ageism and racism. And next up are ageism and ableism and ageism and sexism. So if you know of one, if you want to write it, let me know. We'll share everything we know about how to do these things. But I would also say noodle around the clearinghouse and see what you learn and share there's tons of fun videos, there's tons of stuff, you know, read it, learn from it, and use social media or your non-existent dinner parties, because everyone's at home alone or whatever, to get the ideas that speak to you most powerfully, because then you'll be the most powerful and authentic when you're talking about them. Exemplars, you know, I talk about becoming an old person in training. It was a phrase I encountered from a geriatrician ages ago, and I didn't really know what it meant or what I was doing yet, but I was like, oh, I guess that's what I've become. And it's really just an act of imagination or will, because ageism takes root in denial, like, oh, it's never going to happen to me. Old people are other, right? And when becoming an old person in training is just a little acknowledgement, like someday it can be as far off as you need it to be, no judgment, that you will get old. And when we do that, we start looking at older people instead of past them, especially younger people. It's wonderful if you can start this early in life so you don't get sort of trapped on this hamster wheel of denial, which just costs more money and is more futile and fear-inducing the longer we stay on it. So I would say just look at ordinary people around you, because yes, there are the you know, people jumping out of skydiving, you know, airplanes, and the people starting companies at advanced age. More power to them, but pick and if they're, you know, if they do something that you admire, that's your example. But it's also could be just, you know, the woman next door how she tends her garden, or how she adapts to something in her life. Look at how people are, you know, adapting to COVID, and you know, little things are pretty interesting and heroic too.
This strikes me, you know, it's so critical now that I'm 60, but I've always been fascinated by the fact that the United States is so youth obsessed, and plenty of other cultures seem to really do honor and respect and celebrate the later decades. So I'm just wondering what we might learn from.
You know, the U.S. is indeed, I mean, I think Hollywood is probably the epicenter of ageism. And we have, the U.S. has such an outsized influence in pop culture, which is totally youth-centric. So the driving force here is that the U.S. is a hyper-capitalist society. And when youth is commodified, people make money off it, right? China and Asian countries that have Confucian values, where they have a tradition of ancestor worship, are less ageist indeed, but as urbanization and capitalism have encroached, those values have eroded. Indigenous cultures in the US, on the other hand, do value their elders, and we see it more in the African American community here as well. So it's less a question of geography as it is culture. And also it helps, of course, to live in a community where we are exposed to people of all ages. So that's why urbanization is a problem. And that's why I have another answer to a really important thing you can do to address ageism internally, at any scale that appeals to you, which is to make friends of all ages. Age segregation is a huge problem. And I think we have this idea that, that person I won't have stuff in common with them because they're so much younger or so much older. And it's rarely the case. I mean, if you are an extreme athlete, you're not going to find a lot of older people doing that. But if you think of something you like to do and actively seek out a mixed age group to do it in, that is a way to age integrate your life. And I think in places in the world where people still live in small communities, there's less ageism because the contribution of people all the way through the life course is obvious. And because you like some old people and others you don't like, and you like some kids and you don't like other kids, it doesn't have to do with their age, it has to do with the kind of person they are.
As Ashton was talking about kind of the biases we have, my suggestion, which you can find on the Old School website, is to take the implicit association test based on age, because it's a really interesting way of finding out the biases that we have. And not surprisingly, I think if you take it, you'll find out that most of us do have biases. Even if we are anti-ageism activists, we have biases in favor of younger people as opposed to older people. I was fortunate when I took it. I don't like anyone either younger or older.
That's the spirit.
Or you could reframe it and say, I like everyone. But it's a really interesting, because once you take it, you find out over 3/4 of people who've taken it have implicit bias against older people. So,
Wow.
But you can find the link on Old School Clearinghouse. But
yeah,
it's off Harvard University website.
And if you are involved at all in civic stuff, changing the narrative, I do know Janine, full disclosure, Changing the Narrative Colorado is doing fantastic work around changing the way people in Colorado think about age and aging, and their materials are up on Old School. So our idea there is to, have models that are scalable and replicable. So if you want to try and put a program together, look at what Janine is doing. Changing the Narrative Colorado.
Hi, Ashton.
Hey.
You touched on it a little bit when you talked about how we could be more of an intergenerational society, but can you talk a little bit about how valid or invalid it is to think of people in terms of their generations? There's a lot of generational warfare out there, especially since COVID, but it's always been there, but COVID seems to have brought it out a bit. So can you talk a little bit about, can we ever really talk about generations in a valid way?
That's a great question. Nice and geeky. Thank you for that. Again, there's always two sides. I think every generation, that we get older, we go, oh, kids today, what's up with that? And the kids are like, oh, those, old people, they're annoying. So I think there's a bit of a human tendency here, but basically absolutely not. The whole idea of the generation gap was fabricated by conservative think tanks in the 1970s. This is my next blog post, so stay tuned. I'll write about it. As a way to pit generations against each other. Almost everything we think of as because I mean, I'll happy to talk about that too. That is what prejudice does. Look at what happened in the early days of COVID again, when people were railing at all those young people out partying on the beach. But for each of them, there was a young person railing about the fact that their parent or their neighbor was going out and doing shopping and acting like they weren't at risk. Fools and geniuses come in all ages, right? And so I think the whole, the generational finger pointing that we get into it's compelling because it's conflict. Conflict sells papers. We don't click through on the story that says everything's humming along just like it usually does, right? If there's a story of some, people getting mad at each other, that does have currency and get click-throughs, but it is almost always fabricated. Yes, each generation, I mean, I was just talking to my partner today about his dad being, born as my dad was, of course, during the Great Depression, and how that absolutely did shape some, of their thoughts about economic security, and what they did with their lives. But that is a historical fact. It's not a value. And we tend to think of, millennials are always getting blamed for being stuck on their devices and being selfish and not staying on the job. When we were their age, we did the same thing. So I love your question. And of course, as ever, there is an element of shared experience across the lifespan, but really try not to fall for generational framing, because it's not helpful and it's divisive.
Thank you, Ashton, for your wisdom here and sharing your insights. I had a real quick question on, could you give a couple more examples of the dual bias you were referring to? You said ageism and ableism. Like, what are some other examples of that?
I can think of an anecdote about a friend of mine who went to visit her almost like 86-year-old aunt, I think. And she here in New York. And so her aunt said they were going out, and she went and got one of those stand-up shopping carts that we use in New York because we don't have cars. And she plopped her purse in it. And Wendy said, "Are we going shopping?" She said, "No." And they went out, and she realized that her aunt was using the shopping cart as a walker that didn't look like a walker. And on the way back, she got a leg cramp, and she hobbled because of the cramp, and leaned against the bus stop and said, "This way people will think we're waiting for the bus." So that is a beautiful story about adapting. Out she went with her cart, and she got where she was going. But it is a wretched one about stigma. And I don't know if that's an example. I mean, I think maybe, it doesn't disentangle tidily. That's what makes it so interesting, is the way all these things are intertwined, in my opinion. But think about, when it comes to your body, it's changing. How much of it is age and how much of it is awful. I was laughing because if you look at my author photo, I used to put bleach white in my hair, because I swear to God, here, I'm getting a little gray hair, but this really, from COVID, I'm not sitting in the salon. And I just had my second cataract surgery done, so I don't wear glasses anymore. So if I weren't so ancient, I would still be wearing glasses, which is, which is not to say that I don't, I still can't read in the dark. I don't see as well as I used to in some ways, but that it's much more nuanced than we think. And to just try and untangle, which I can tell you're going to try and do just by asking me such a good question of how these things that we think are joined are not.
Yes.
And what of our fears? I mean, what's your worst fear? And are you projecting, which again, no judgment, we all do, but when you can't find the car keys, kids forget shit too all the time, for example. So just question the question.
Okay.
or the impulse to blame it on age, or to assume that the deficit is so awful that it cannot be adapted to in some way. It may be unwelcome, but it doesn't mean it's the end of life as we know it.
Those are great examples. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And another question I have, which is kind of related, I think, is just what are your thoughts on how technology today is leaving olders in the dust?
It's really more of an issue of class than age. I know smartphone, thank you, Pew, one of the helpful Pew studies, smartphone as a proxy for being, tech adept and having Wi-Fi, usage increases with class, although it drops off in the very old. Technology is a tool. It depends. If we want to make sure that poor kids or isolated older people have access to technology, we can put it there. And, older people, just like anyone else, if that is the way that they get their groceries or see their new grandchild, they're going to figure it out. It might take us longer. We might need the instructions written down, but that's okay. If, technology needs to be put in the hands of people equally, and people will figure out how to use it.
That's a great question. So Lisa Hatcher.
Different things are important to me now than were important to me, say 10 years ago, or even maybe 5 years ago. The things I got excited about don't excite me so much now, and then other things have become more important. And when I'm interacting with people who are now so much younger than I am, sometimes it's a surprise to me that I'm the old person, and here I am working with all these people. I could be their mother, but just finding out what they care about and sort of remembering what I cared about at that age helps me to establish a better connection. And then hopefully they're not seeing me so much as an older person, but just as a person.
That's a great comment. I mean, I'm sure right off the bat, they are seeing you as older. We see difference, right? So it's, a great line about, what's the problem with saying I'm colorblind is that if you don't see race, you don't see racism. They see your age, Lisa, but by reaching out to them on their terms, that fades away, and they quickly discovered that you have this thing in common, or this thing you hate, or whatever. They look past you as to the individual that you are, and that's human. I mean, there are some people who are so stuck in their ways or bigoted, we're never gonna get past that, but that's not the majority. I mean, I think there's a tendency among older people to think, oh, that young person won't want me to sit next to them, or when we get to a social event, make a beeline for people our own age. That's a good habit to try and break. I mean, there might be some, really unpleasant person in that group who's going to roll their eyes and go, hey, what's the old lady coming over? But, probably not. Most of them won't even notice. And it is our internal, or they'll notice for the first second, and then you'll say, I like this song, or have it, whatever you do, talk about the thing you want to talk about. And that barrier breaks down so fast.
That's wonderful. That's great. In that same vein, John Geraghty, you have an interesting question that's, follows along with what Lisa wanted to chat about.
My question stems around the idea of intergenerational mentoring. I happen to be an executive coach, is what I do for a living. So I work with a lot of people that are a lot of different ages. But I think that that's a way that we gain from them, they gain from us. We, often end up not really seeing much difference whatsoever. I coach a lot of people that are half my age, and I always forget, there's really a difference in age. And I think at some level they forget the same things, but we benefit from, they benefit from my experience. I benefit from, them introducing me to different technologies and things along those lines.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the goal, is to see each other as individuals. And I'm sure, my guess is not to lead the witness, but you don't see that every young person is a whiz with computers, and no older person can turn on the dishwasher. I mean, these are false. It's just not true.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that, we have an opportunity. I think you mentioned it earlier, like the way we envision ourselves aging has a lot to do with how we age. We expect to have a certain level of capability at a particular age. We tend to move in that direction. Whereas a lot of that's just built into our societal beliefs about what's possible.
Yeah, and the negative beliefs can become self-fulfilling prophecies. And it's also, it can be problematic to, to feel like if you're not jumping out of airplanes or starting your own company or whatever, that you are somehow failing, that's, you need to, especially when it comes to the physical stuff, when we set an unrealistic standard of, how it is to age, it's one of my least favorite phrases, as Diana knows, is successful aging, which really means to not age, right? To spend a lot of effort and money if you have it. It's available only to the well-off, to work really hard to continue to look and move like a younger version of yourself. So that's a foolish, the whole anti-aging thing, good luck with that. But we can certainly aspire to being healthy and to learning to, if something doesn't work as well, how can we adapt to it so we can stay out in the world or be in it, not maybe not out in the world, but be in it and be engaged on whatever terms are available to us.
Yeah, I'll stay in for just a second longer in this dialogue here. And I think that while I agree with you that we can end up trying to chase things that are unavailable, there's also so much that is easily available that we can change the way that we experience aging. And that doesn't require a lot of money. It doesn't require a lot of time, but just requires a different level of awareness of how do we impact that. And not that it matters, people can choose to age however they want to, but most people would choose to have the capabilities and hold on to them if they can.
Absolutely.
John is leading a very interesting breakout session, and that's a beautiful lead into what you're going to be helping people explore and experiment just around the body and maintaining balance and strength.
First of all, I love seeing some of these people that I haven't seen in a long time. And I want to say that one of the most defeating things that I hear around me is when a person says about themselves, I am 68 years old. I've only got a little time left. And I just want to shake them and just go, what are you talking about? And I think that we collectively have to change that narrative for people and understand that they have a lot of their life left in what they can do. And then the second thing is, and I posted it in the private chat, is there is a lot of intergenerational conversation going on. And I'm going to give a plug for one of my dear friends. If you can write her name down, it's Marge Schiller, Schiller. And she is very big in what's called appreciative inquiry and intergenerational communication. And she is somebody who is completely on board with what the speaker has been saying and other guests have been saying about how important it is to develop conversation amongst the generation. And yes, it can be hard. But right now during COVID, she has started a movement that is creating conversation about COVID throughout generations and collecting the stories of people during COVID. And so be prepared. It's something that's going to happen. So I just wanted to say thank you all. And this kind of conversation is so important to have because just as the speaker said, it starts with acknowledging what you know or don't know. And so we have to learn it. So have at it.
Thank you, Bev. And if that's not already in the old school clearinghouse, we hope it will be one day, huh? So we're winding down, and I just want to make sure that before we do so, I'd love to make sure we've answered everybody's questions. Actually, I see Pedro Caceres, you have a comment or a question.
I really loved it, Ashton. I'm the father of a person with different abilities. And because of Diana, I realized that I'm aging. I didn't think about this before this week. And I realized that probably I'm eight years from retirement and 25 years from my prime. But my question is, and it had to do with a comment. I probably was writing this at the same time you were making a comment, is technologies are creating sometimes alternative and real personalities. And people are reflecting themselves online, not the way they are, right? So there are two things that have happened. I saw a wave of people creating profiles and embellishing them up through social media. And then COVID came, and the changes that needed to happen the next 10 or 15 years had just happened in 6 months. People want authenticity, right? Authentic. Just show me who you are and in your house with your hair, and I don't care anything else. And then you show authentic, the conversation is meaningful. You don't. It's just fake and artificial. And I'm not interested anymore. Which some kind just that's why probably social media is having such a tough time now, just connecting and what it used to be, right? So I like to understand from what you have seen, your comments around that. Have you seen an evolution of how we present ourselves, and are you seeing the technology and social media is coming just to a normal stage where showing your age, who you are and how you are, and all those things are just making a comeback, and then we just need to stop pretending that we're not those. And I'm not blonde and I don't have blue eyes, so I'm okay with that.
Well, I'm not an expert on social media. My guess, and it is just a guess, is that there is just as much, we don't, just because COVID came and we're all stuck behind screens, we don't lose a lifetime of habits in how we present ourselves. I do think one of the interesting connections with ableism and ageism is that people with disabilities have been asking for the kinds of adaptations to remote gatherings, remote presentations, remote employment. They've been asking for these changes for decades. And suddenly, once the health of the general public was at risk, these changes became possible. I mean, y'all don't know whether I have pants on. You know, there's a lot of, I think all the time about the classic cartoon of, you know, early on, like on the internet, what dog saying to another dog as he's typing on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. You know, I think there's room for a lot more artifice, but I also want to think that people know whether or not you're being authentic. I think from the screen hasn't, you know, taken that away from us, but I'm not sure how it's related to age, you know, as long as we, you know, I'm a bit of a technophobe. I don't like admitting that, but I have had to master social media to some degree and figure out how to be comfortable on Zoom because it's my livelihood. You know, it's what I do. So if it didn't matter to me, I wouldn't be as good at it. And I think that's true. I mean, sorry, I don't mean to imply like I'm some big expert, but we learn what we need to learn in order to do the things that matter the most to us. And I think that's a human thing, not so much an age-based thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So before we transition to the breakout experiences, I just want to make sure everybody has your questions answered, and looks like everybody's good. Ashton, thank you. Your energy is contagious and your call to action has been heard. I'm very excited to follow you and your path forward.
Thank you. Yep. Follow me on social media. I try to be interesting, and sign up for my super occasional newsletter if you want to know what I'm up to. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd love for you guys to please stay on. I know it's getting late, and I know we've been Zoomed like crazy in these past months, especially, but we've got two very interesting breakout experiences to share with you. The first is with John Geraghty. You just got to see him earlier. John works with leaders to help them envision and celebrate lives of joy and impact. He's got over 40 years of experience, and I'm going to make sure I capture all of this, in the fields of physical, psychological, and neurobiological optimization. And now he's focusing most of his energy working with 45 to 65-year-old business owners. He's the author of a book called Prism of Perspective. And he's the creator of Fitness Presence, which he's generously offered to share a bit with us tonight. He's going to go through basically how we can rewire our body. And his program is something that is done in just 10 minutes a day. Now, when I first met John, I have to admit, John, I thought that sounded really nice, but I didn't I couldn't embrace it until I started experiencing it myself. So I invited John to join us in that way tonight. He's going to show us, he's going to explain it a bit, and then he's also going to take us through it. You know, obviously not too vigorously, but let you experience some of the ways his movements go. And the second session is being led by Betsy Small-Campbell, and she is a teacher, counselor, and writer, a very gifted writer who's worked as a cross-cultural counselor and special educator with marginalized populations around the world. She served in the Peace Corps in Sierra Leone and is executive director of War Child USA. Her book in progress, and oh my gosh, I can't wait till you guys read it. It's called Before, which explores life in the Diamond District of Sierra Leone. And it speaks to our current cultural and political moment. So she's going to lead us in a very different experience. It's going to be a live group writing experience. And with a series of prompts, she's going to guide you to put pen to paper and help explore your pandemic experience. And maybe even discover something else about your own story and look ahead and find a thread to reimagine your future. I am so excited to see people that have joined with their parents. My husband and my mother-in-law are on. My dear friend Marty is in Pennsylvania with her parents who are on. And so I'm very excited for that. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to say that I am with my soon to be 89-year-old and my just recently turned 86-year-old mother, and my dad and mom are just plugging along beautifully. And I thought, I live in Connecticut, they're in Western PA, and I said, look, we've got to have dinner, be over by 7. I'm hopping on this talk with Diana, expecting them to say, okay, we don't know anything about that. We're not, you go do your thing, as much as they love Diana. Well, I saw my mom sit there for a good long time, and my dad as well. And I think that they surprised themselves at how engaged they felt toward this conversation. I mean, they're in good shape because they've stayed connected with a community, both the neighbors and their church, but they have an intergenerational life, and that I think is a huge boon as we get older. Stay friends with all ages. That's
yeah. And, that's a great point. And give them our love. Yeah. So a few of you have raised your hand and are headed over. If you're not already in the breakout room with Betsy, this is really your last chance if you want to do so, to move on over there. If not, we're going to get started really quickly then with John. So let's begin. John, thank you so much. I gave you a little bit of an introduction, but I would love for you to take over the room and lead us.
Great, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. As Diana said, and thank you for putting this together. That was outstanding. I really learned a lot from Ashton. And so I mentioned I was an executive coach. I've also been in and around the fitness industry since I was 20. And I was very fortunate early on to work alongside Arthur Jones, who's the gentleman who invented Nautilus, and really like any of that high intensity strength training, super slow training, all that came out. And so I've been exposed to it for a really long time, whereas a lot of people kind of have been exposed later. And throughout my life, I've recognized that some of the practices that I built early have really yielded me a lot of benefit in my aging. But the other thing that has been interesting is being able to work with others and watch them reverse their aging and to do it really easy. And I'm not at all suggesting that, I'm not trying to come off as ageist. What I'm suggesting is we have a lot of choices in what we're capable of doing as we age. Sometimes it could happen to me tomorrow, right? There could be something that strikes me as a disease. I could have a stroke. I could have some kind of situation. We all can. And so we have to be conscious that, we're not judging people for what their capabilities are. With that being said, we also have the possibility of many of us for a long time to delay many of the diminishments in our capabilities. And that's really what I want to talk about, so that it's a choice. You know, you can decide what you'd like to do. So let me share my screen. I'm going to walk you through a little presentation here, and we'll go to here. And that should give me this. Can you guys see my screen? I guess nobody can tell me if they can see.
Yep, we can see it.
Is that visible? Okay, great. Let me see if I can stretch this a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So anyway, the name of this approach to exercise, I call fitness presence. And I call it functionally fit forever, because what it does is it gives you an opportunity to really work on all the different aspects of your fitness that allow you to maintain high levels of function. And you're able to do this for a really long period of time because it's been designed to be incredibly safe. And so we'll kind of walk through that, and I'll take you through the presentation. Then I love to get into conversations as we move on. One of the things that Diana already shared with you is this is a program that only takes about 10 minutes. And a lot of times people think that if they're going to be fit, it's going to be something that's going to be really time intensive, that they're going to have to devote a ton of their time in order to maintain fitness. And so either one, some people choose to do that and dedicate a bunch of time and exercise and things along those lines, and ultimately end up creating for themselves what we call overuse injuries. And so people exercise, you know, they try to stay really active, they run or they do whatever it is. But when you have a lot of impact over time, it tends to cause some challenges. And so what this does is it allows you to activate all the different aspects of your fitness without overtraining and without causing a lot of injury. So I talk to people about what I say, you want to opt out of the drop. And so this chart is basically something that I stole from a book called Younger Next Year, which was written by a gentleman named Chris Crowley, who was about 75 at the time, and his doctor, Henry Lodge. And what they talked about is that for many people, right around the age of 40, we start to decline in our capabilities, mostly because we're not demanding enough of our physical selves and our mental selves. So what happens is we start to diminish. And so I'm 58, and for more than a decade now, I've had friends that would say, oh, I'm in pretty good shape for whatever age that was, 50, 45, 42, right? And so what we want to recognize is that the loss of function mostly has, or significantly has, to do with that we're not demanding the capability to have that function. And so if you don't make a demand upon your body for that function, there's really no reason for your body to have it. It's actually just an evolutionary individual experiment, N equals 1, right, of your own evolutionary process and how you can engage in it. And so when I look at out of the drop, what I want you to kind of look at here is many people age and lose their, I won't call it aging, they lose their function early. And others choose instead to maintain that function for a really long period of time. Interesting thing is they don't tend to vary as much in how long they live as they vary in how they live and what they're capable of doing in that period of time. And so for those of you who are interested in maintaining the function that you have enjoyed throughout your youth, and you'd like to bring that with you throughout your life, it's really you're quite capable of doing it. And so I want you to look at this. This is like one of my favorite pieces of art, by the way. And so I have always been intrigued by this model, but what I want you to think about is in this Vitruvian man, you see how the guy's reached out, right? And he's right at that edge of the circle. And so what I want you to do is imagine that that's your current capability, right? That circle is your current capability. And the way that the universe works is if you withdraw from that circle will continue to chase you down until you get very small in your capabilities, right? So if you're out here stretched out, actually pushing against that circle, what will happen is that circle will expand, because what's going on is our bodies respond to the demands we place upon it. It's just evolutionary. If your body has this expectation that, wow, I didn't have the strength I needed today to do what was asked of me, I better build more strength. I didn't have the flexibility that was requested of me today, I need to become more flexible. I need to enhance my cardiovascular, my cardiorespiratory. I need better balance. It would be great to be more coordinated because of these challenges. So what happens is our bodies respond to all of these demands, and continue to either maintain if we've done it really well forever, or if you aren't at the level of fitness that you'd like to be at today, the level of capability that you'd like to be at today, there's a really good chance that you can go back a decade or two in your capabilities so that you'll be capable of things to move and feel and in ways that you probably haven't felt in a decade or more, without having to invest huge chunks of money or spend a ton of time, but just by really intelligently challenging all the different systems of your body. Now, it's not just physical. The same thing is true for our minds, right? There's what they call neurogenesis, right? We continue to build brain cells. We continue to build new neural highways so that our minds think more effectively. Even people that have Alzheimer's or have the tendency toward Alzheimer's and have plaquing, you can actually work around that at some level by continuing to build new pathways. It's like if you were on a road with construction detour, but you built other pathways around it, you can still get to where you want to go. And so by continually challenging the way we think, our focus, our creativity, not only do we become more physically fit, but we maintain our mental and our cognitive abilities as well. So let me just ask a question. It's got, are any of these things that aren't important for you? Do you look at it and say, well, I don't really care if I have strength as I age. I don't care if I have flexibility or cardiovascular balance or coordination, or that I have body awareness or focus or creativity. And if you think these things are all important to you, if you look at it and say, yes, those things are important to me, then what I ask you to think about is like, what are you doing right now that is demanding more of those systems so that they're continually growing and you're pressing out against that circle? Because, some people have exercise programs that are very limited in what they do. I run, I lift, I stretch, I do whatever it is. And that's great because those things will continue to get better. But unless you're pushing on all of the systems, you're going to begin to introduce limitations into your life. And if those things are important to you, whether you do the program that I've designed or you do something else, I think it's really important to be addressing all of those to maintain the highest possibility for quality of life and function as long as we can. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm going to assume it does. So one of the challenges I think with exercise programs is we think we should start somewhere other than where we are, right? Everybody on this call is at a different place right now physically in all these different areas, right? Some are super flexible, some might have great strength, some have cardiovascular, some have some limitations, some have disability, right? So the thing that you want to recognize is that all exercise programs need to start tailored for you, exactly where you are. It's just like if you were to do a Google map, right? It doesn't say, if you don't say, hey, how do I get there? They don't tell you how to get there from somewhere else. They tell you how to get there from where you are. And so the same thing is true with your fitness. We have to recognize, regardless of where you are, that's where you're starting. Now, the great thing is we can move you from where you are to wherever you want to be. You ever hear that saying, like somebody's like, oh, you can't get there from here, right? Like somebody's, oh, you can get anywhere from anywhere. So we can all significantly expand our capabilities. Just want to make sure that you're starting where you are because it's safe and because it's the most effective, right? I don't know, but I'm certain people have started exercise programs jumping off the couch and deciding I want to get in great shape, and they go run 5 miles. And all of a sudden, you're sore, you have shin splints, and then that's your one exercise program. Or you go to the gym and you hire a trainer, and that trainer is going to whip you into shape. And so what they do is they really crush you. You don't want to go back. Or maybe there's an injury, right? There's an injury that occurs because that program didn't meet you where you are. And so my encouragement is when you think about exercise, recognize as it relates to your fitness, it relates to your capabilities, you can go just about anywhere you want to go. But you have to begin this journey where you are and then begin to move. So think about compounding interest, right? Einstein was famous for saying, he was asked like, what's the most powerful force in the universe? And he said, compound interest. And so think of your own growth and your improvement as compounding over time. And so let's look at this, right? And let's say that you got 1% better, right? On a daily basis. You just got a tiny little bit better on a daily basis. And this is obviously mathematical. It's for, example purposes. We don't really grow exactly in this way. But how long do you think it would take you to double your capabilities if you got 1% better every day? It'd take you less than 90 days, right? So essentially, if you just got a little better every day in your strength or your cardio or whatever it happens to be, 3 months later, you're radically transformed. But if we do it a little bit at a time, you don't expose yourself to a bunch of injuries, right? We're not talking about, P90X, spending 90 minutes doing plyometrics, exposing yourself to impact injuries. We can do this gently and gradually and truly transform what's possible for you. So I'm going to talk about a few of the key principles. And this program was designed around, I have about a dozen different paradigms and principles that are ultimately introduced to you, but for timing and to kind of keep it simple, I wanted to keep it, just condensed today. And I think that these things will make a difference for you. So a lot of times people talk to me about my program, and Diana, I think you were probably thinking the same thing. I'm like, well, if I'm not lifting weights, if there's no machine, how am I actually going to get stronger? Anybody that ever crossed your mind? Like, how do you actually get stronger if you're not going to do that? Obviously, sometimes you can do body weight stuff, right? So that's an option. But another option that's available, and one that I have found to be a really perfect option, is it relates to what they call antagonist resistance. And I'm going to explain it to you simply here and see if it makes sense to you. So just imagine that I were to be throwing a punch at somebody, right? Boom, I'm not really going to punch you. But if I'm throwing a punch at somebody, the muscles that move me in that direction, the primary movers for that are the front part of your shoulder. Muscles always pull, by the way, that's how you can tell. So the front part of your shoulder, your chest, and then extending your arm is your tricep. So if you think about throwing a punch, those are the muscles that are the primary movers. But if I threw a punch really hard and I didn't have antagonist muscles, like muscles to stop that movement, then we'd hyperextend, right? We'd cause injury. So the body's beautifully made so that every primary mover has an antagonist mover. So in this same movement that I'm doing this, the muscles that are going to stop me in my punch are going to be the back of my shoulder, my biceps, and then the muscles of the upper back, the rhomboids, the lats, things along those lines. And so what's interesting that you have the capability of doing is engaging your antagonist muscles to create the perfect resistance throughout a full range of movement. So literally without any weights, you can add resistance to your body. And as you get better and better at gaining body awareness, there's a concept that called introception. It's like an awareness inside your body that you really want to be building. It's about total embodiment. And so as you build that, you can continue to add resistance. You also can add resistance through your hands. For instance, like everybody do this, right? Take your hands. Let me see your hands. I'm watching everybody. So take your hands right now and press them together in front of your chest. Okay. And now what I want you to do is push into your hands and at the same time, press out toward the screen. And feel that muscle. Can you feel your chest muscles contracting there? Okay. So we can basically create something very similar to like a bench press or an incline press or a decline press. And there's really no limitation based on a machine telling me what I have to do, or even gravity. So sometimes you may have a particular injury. Like I've had shoulder injuries in the past. Anyone else have any shoulder injuries? Okay. So I'm guessing that you've had times where there were certain movements you really couldn't do, right? You had a range of movement that was difficult for you to do. The great thing here is you can move around that. So if this is painful, do this, do this. So you get a lot of the same stimulation, but you don't want to work through the range of pain. You want to allow that to recover, but you can work around it. So that's kind of tying the antagonist resistance. And then this is actually called isokinetics. And so through isokinetics and antagonist resistance, you can create a lot of resistance so you can continue to get stronger. The second thing I want to talk about is biomechanically correct movements. And that is just understanding what is the function of the muscle that you're trying to work. And the way that exercise works, exercise strictly defined is you intentionally place a demand on the function of a system that is in excess of the capacity of that system so that it forces adaptation. So that's true. Even let's just think about this, even just like a math exercise, right? So many of us have had children when they were going through school. If they knew how to add 2 + 2, that would no longer be a math exercise for them because they already could do it. But if you introduced subtraction or multiplication or division, right, that's an exercise because we're overloading its capacity. Well, the same thing's true with your muscles, with your range of movement, with your cardiovascular system, with your balance. What you're trying to do is just basically overload it, and to do it in a really safe way, pay attention to the biomechanics. Like, what is the function? Like I talked about the function of these muscles, right? And so what you're going to do is place resistance against the function of each muscle so that you can continue to stimulate that. And the last thing I want to talk about is, why is this so fast? Because you're essentially doing a bunch of things simultaneously. You're working on strength, flexibility, balance, coordination, proprioception, body leanness, resistance to injury, mental focus, creativity, all in the same 10 minutes, all at the same time. And so instead of having to break that out and spend an hour and a half or whatever in order to get that same kind of stimulation, because you do it simultaneously, you synergistically get the benefit in much briefer period of time. So it's comprehensive, it's holistic, it's not a quick fix. You know, if somebody's here like, oh, great, I want to learn how to lose X pounds by Tuesday, wrong place, right? What we're really looking at, what I'm here for, the way that I focus on exercise is I want to be as capable as possible when I'm 85 as I can be. And so I use that vision in my mind so that I want to maintain fitness and capability as long as I can. And so that's really the way that we work. Of course, other things that matter in addition to exercise are nutrition, mindset, and in the program, we get into it. Of course, in this period of time, I can't cover everything. So we're going to kind of recognize that there are principles underneath both of those things that make a difference as well. And with that, I'm going to say that's all it. Who has some questions that I might be able to answer for you? Hey, does anyone, let me ask you a question. Would you like to have some questions asked? Or would you like me to kind of demonstrate it briefly and then have some questions? What would be best? Diane, I'm going to give you the choice.
Well, you know, I was going to interrupt. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think it not only will it be fun for us to try. I mean, if you want to stand up from your Zoom, I think we're probably all ready to do that.
Stand up for your Zoom, get a little stretching going on.
To feel it is to really get it. So yeah, I'd love to see that.
Okay. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through this a few exercises. We'll spend like 10 minutes just to get a feel for it. I'll show you a couple of different angles so you can get a look at it. Everybody, I want everybody to understand your own physical capabilities. Remember I said start where you are. Like some of you may have more range of movement than I do. I may have more range of movement than some others do. You want to just be okay with wherever your range of movement is. Because the whole thing is like when we're working on flexibility, we're going to be at the edge of our capability and we're going to gradually be moving it. So like if for instance, if I'm doing an exercise which includes a squat and your squat stops here, that's okay because that's where your squat stops. You know, if you can put your butt on the ground, that's great. You do whatever you do and it really doesn't matter. The only thing you want to remember is that when you're at the edge of your capability, you're continually expanding that, right? You're pushing out against that circle. You're going to continue to think about pushing out against the circle and think a little bit. We're not trying to ram against the circle. We're trying to gently push that circle out. So the first exercise I'm going to show you, I'll show you from the front, then I'll show you from the side. And so we're going to start with our hands together. And I want you to press into your hands. And you can either stand on your toes or you can do this flat-footed. If it's beginning, probably flat-footed is fine, right? And what I want you to do is you're going to raise up your hands as you lower your body. So you're going to press into your hands and drop your body into a squat. So you get a nice squat there. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come, I'm going to go from the side now. So we see what that looks like, right? So we're in a squat. And now what I want you to do is kind of jump out of there. And you're going to drop your hands underneath to the ground and hold your body straight out here. And then you're just going to start to bend your body toward the ground and keep your abdominal muscles taut and slowly bend your body down to whatever range of movement you have. And then you come back out. You squat back down. And then you stand up.
Yeah, John, it's so amazing how just the sheer experience of hard pressing your hands together and keeping all those muscles
taut, right? It's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So did everybody get that one? Do you want me to do that one more time just so you get a feel for it? We'll do it a couple times.
Well, also one of the things I also think that you do so well in the videos that I have followed with you is also talking about the fact that all the muscles in your legs are also engaged and how the energy is flowing.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So when you're doing this, I'll show you on this next move then. I'll just move to a different one and we'll show it here. So when you're moving, what you want to do is think about pressing into the ground and remember the antagonist resistance we talked about? So in other words, like I can stand up very easily, right? I can just stand up, boom, no antagonist resistance. Or I can choose to drop into a stretch and then press down into the ground and fight the resistance. So the hamstring actually pulls my leg down while the quadricep presses the leg up. So when I battle those two muscles, it makes it more difficult for me to stand. As I reach up over top and lean in, so I'm going to pull with my lats, one hand's pulling against the other, and you drop down, breathing. Just make sure your breathing's good. Press deep. And now as you come out, just press hard into the ground and pull one hand against the other. All the way up. And then we're just going to switch sides. Okay, so the front foot, just because I didn't describe this, the front foot's pointed this way, like away from my body. The back foot's opened up a little bit, but you want to find wherever your ankle feels good. We're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to think about stretching this part of your body. So as you're dropping in, you're breathing, pressing into the ground. Nice and slow, real good stretch. Then pressing into the ground, resist standing up. And then one hand's fighting the other so that you have your upper body's engaged, your legs are engaged, and your core is engaged. And you come to the top. Cool deal?
Yeah.
So that's 2 of 3 ways that we move. We move sagittally, which means front and back, which we did the first thing. That's called frontal when you go along a frontal plane. And then the third one I'm going to show you is transverse, and that's where we're going to rotate around our core. And so I'm going to press again. So just to bring it up, the first one was a press. The second was a pull, right? The third's going to be a press. So we're going to rotate into a deep lunge, pressing one hand into the other. And then you're going to rotate your torso to whatever level becomes comfortable for you. Stretching. And then come out nice and slowly. And switch sides. You're pressing right here. You should feel this in your chest. You're going to rotate around. And you come out nice and slowly. So what I want you to think about, one of the things that's really helpful here is injuries typically occur when the force exceeds the structural integrity of a system. And so if you think about your physics early on, remember that force equals mass times acceleration. So if we pull all the acceleration out, you see how slow we're moving? We pull that acceleration out, you don't have a lot of force. So you don't have a lot of risk of injury. You always want to do good form. You always want to do things slowly. You want to do it carefully. You want to pay attention to any pains that you have, but do it nice and slowly in good form. Pay attention to what's feeling good in your body and move in that way. And the interesting thing is literally, if you were to just do those three things, you've worked almost every muscle in your body. If you do it hard, you've worked strength, flexibility, balance, cardiovascular, and done it in an easy way. Now, one of the other things that I like to do that I think is important is balance. So I'll just introduce a balance move to you. And again, if your balance isn't great, you can find something to stand against. You know, you can find a counter or a chair. But over time, you can learn to, you know, really focus and have good balance as well. And this one here, I'm just you pull your leg up. And then you can, you know, if you feel comfortable, reach underneath your leg and kick out. Pull it up and in. And set it back down. And so this works on flexibility and balance. Get a good stretch.
I have to say, John, that for me, the balance is the thing I noticed first improve.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at first I was falling down or I had to lean against a wall, and now I'm certainly not able to, you know, get my leg all the way out.
That looks great.
But you know, just the idea of standing like this without teeter-tottering.
That's
just
awesome.
makes me feel so good about my, you know, obviously balance is such a huge part of what we lose as we age.
Right. I mean, so many people that are in, you know, they're in broken hips is huge from people who lose balance. They lose strength and they lose balance. And then they, you know, broken hips is almost like a fatality. You know, there's a pretty significant number of people never really recover from that. Yeah. And so if we can learn to be better balanced, we can work on that. So I'm going to open it up for questions and see if I can be of help.
I think one of the things for me that is really important, and I'm sure that it's important for doing the exercise as well, I forget to breathe.
Right.
And I'm sure that's not good, but I can't remember to breathe.
Right. So that's a great point. And one of the things that is really great about this exercise and all exercises is you're attempting to increase the amount of focus you need, right? It's like a moving meditation. And so what we want to do is you know, again, yes, you want to make sure you're not holding your breath. And over time, that's one of the areas where you grow, and you grow in your mental focus and awareness as well. Mm. And so thank you for that question. That's a great point. Physically, we want to make sure we're doing it. And because there's more to pay attention to, sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many moving parts. That's one of the things that's actually great about it, because you are expanding your mental capacity.
Yeah. So to follow up on that, because I had a similar question about breath, is because I found myself holding my breath because I was focusing on the movement.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm not seeing who's speaking right now.
Oh, it's Kirsten.
Okay, let me open you up, Kirsten. Okay, thank you, Kirsten. Hi. You know, I was focusing on the movement and catching myself holding my breath.
So in order to maximize that movement, am I trying to also use my breath naturally rather than it has to be as part of the movement? Like when I move this way, I breathe in, and when I move that way, I breathe out.
Love that question. Yeah, so what I tend to do now is I have different days where I focus on different things. So about once a week, I focus on matching my movement to my breath, and it changes the pace of the movement. You know, so I have a period of time where I'll show you, like if I were to do an extension movement where I'm stretching my spine, I'm breathing in. Yeah. So if I'm going up, I'm breathing in. And if I'm laying back, I'm breathing out. So I do that about once a week where I'm really focused on that. Otherwise, I just try to breathe. You know, I just try to keep it breathing, just like if I was running. And if you find yourself holding your breath, breathe, you know, and don't freak out. I mean, you know, you're going to become aware that you're holding your breath, not a great thing to do, and then just begin to breathe. But it's, you know, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. And hopefully to that other point you said to Sarah, which is that you then learn the awareness of your breath. The movement becomes natural. And now you have opened up a mental capacity to the meditative properties of breath.
Right. Absolutely.
It's not an afterthought. It's actually something that we then can use.
Right. And again, so one of the things that I find, another principle is that it's variable speed. So there's nothing controlling your speed. So sometimes I do the movements a little more rapidly. Sometimes I do them so slow that one movement might take 10 minutes just for variation, just to play. And so with that in mind, obviously I'm not holding my breath for 10 minutes or doing one inhale or exhale. So again, if you can find that fluid breathing, then that's a great place to be. Thank you for that.
Don, do you teach this online anywhere? This is Sarah.
I have taught it online. What I'm choosing to do is actually give you access to 5 of the exercises and some of the principles. So anybody that wants it, just write your name down in the chat or connect with Diana. And Tori, who actually who brought Diana and us together, is going to send it out to you. And I teach it, as Diana said, a little more in detail about the movements and what's going on and what you want to be thinking about. So you'll have access to learning that. There's a bigger program that's not all provided, right? But you can get in great shape without ever doing the additional ones. But there's about 30 different moves that I've created just so that you can play to create a little more variety. But regardless, if you literally just did what we did today, on a consistent basis, it would absolutely transform your physical capabilities, even just that consistently.
So it looks like, Anne, you have your beautiful blue hand raised.
Hi, Diana and John and everyone. My question is, you said 10 minutes. So would the idea be that you would like put your kitchen timer on 10 minutes and then just sort of do like one exercise at a time until the timer went off? Is that how you would do it? Or would you do a series of the first ones for 2.5 minutes?
I would do a series. No, I would literally do, so when you get started, you might even do 5 minutes, but
yeah,
I would do sagittal frontal transverse, what we did there.
Right.
So we do sagittal frontal transverse. And let's say that you happened to complete and it was 5 minutes and you wanted to go 10, double back.
Just do it again. Yeah.
Just circle back. But I like, and then the other thing that you saw when we did press, pull, press.
Yeah.
Right. So what we're trying to do is, you know, we're trying to work every single muscle in the body. And so when you're pressing, you're primarily working, the primary movers are the front of your chest, right? Your triceps, things along those lines. When you're pulling, it's primarily biceps, back. And so what we're trying to do is make sure you're working everything. So I would go sagittal frontal transverse because you're working the core, twisting, bending, flexing, rotating. That's all the core does. Literally, like somebody's like, all your core does is bends like this, and rotates. That's all it does. So if you do those exercises, you work on everything in the core. Okay. Right. And so if you literally, again, if you just did what we did, okay, and you did it, you'll have significant benefit. And then I'll show you one other thing. So I showed you a front stretch. I like to do a back stretch too. So the back stretch that I would share first is just grab your leg and just try to feel that hip flexor stretch, because that's an area where a lot of people get super tight because they're sitting all the time, especially while they're Zooming, right? So try to see if you can stretch out that hip flexor, and you can pull that foot up. And if you choose to, you can lay into it.
That actually feels good to do that.
Hip flexor stretching is like my favorite thing. It really,
Well, I also love, as you said, that when you, forgot the name of the move you do, but just the whole lying forward and seeing how the supporting leg starts to be activated and your different parts, the awareness of the body is really cool through these.
Yeah, it really is. So what happens over time is you get to think about, like, you understand what every muscle does in your body and you're able to activate it. So when you're on a leg and you're like, say you're in dancer, right? So let me kick up into dancer and I'm laying forward, my lower back's arched.
Nice.
My base leg's driving into the ground. So this leg's pressing, this leg's being stretched, my back's arching, my abdominals are contracted. So you're really working on so many things simultaneously.
Yeah.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions?
Yeah, it looks like we're going to be zapped into the shared room, but while we're waiting, anybody else have anything you want to add or ask John?
I just want to tell John that for the little bit that we have done, I've had a shoulder pain for days, and it is so much better right now, just from doing that.
Sarah, I'm going to just take 1 second and touch on that. I actually was about to go to get shoulder surgery. I had a surgeon tell me that I had a torn labrum, and something happened. He was traveling. He canceled the surgery, and then I just continued to stretch it, and I don't have any range of movement limitation at all in that shoulder. That used to be like, if I went like this, it was like, oh my God, that's so painful, and it just kind of just went away. So I can't tell you that's going to happen for anyone else. It's anecdotal, right? But that was my experience.
Yeah, well,
gradually, a little bit at a time. Think about pressing against that circle, push that circle out, right? You're going to make that circle bigger. Your capability is going to get bigger. We got to hop to the other room. Thank you, everybody.
I especially like the way you phrase things when you talk about something that is the exponential or the compounding benefit of 10 minutes a day. I think that as we begin to see this, and especially because it just takes such a short bit of time, I think that's what most of us are so averse to is, don't have time to go to the gym, can't do that run, or maybe our knees bugging us or something. So I appreciate it very much.
One more second. One of the things that was neat for me, I've exercised my whole life, but I had a ton of overuse injuries. So much so that when my daughter was little, she came into the backyard and she goes, oh, my freaking something or other. And I can't remember what she said, but I was like, Skylar, you can't say that. Where did you hear that? And she looked at me and she goes, your freaking knee, your freaking back, your freaking shoulder. So anyway, what I found is that, that was 20 years ago. And I'm in much better health and fitness today, spending way less time than I was, 20 years ago. And
Wonderful.
So you can be too, if you'd like to be. All right. Thanks, everybody.
And it felt so good having been sitting here all day on Zoom. It felt so good to get up and just move that much.
Good. I'm glad it was helpful for you. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Thank you.
So now Betsy and the people that joined her for the pandemic writing experience are back with us. Sorry, but you got the tail end of our, re-energized bodies. I hope you guys are re-energized in other ways too. I would love to hear if anybody wants to vocalize. You've heard a few people talking about the experience with John, that if any of you guys that were with Betsy feel like vocalizing anything about the experience that you shared, and also more about this fitness thing, I just, as we close the evening, I think it's really important for us to just understand what each other is feeling and experiencing. So open season here.
I will say something because I need to go, but thank you very much. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed both parts of it. So thank you very much, Ashton. Thank you very much, John.
Well, we hope we'll see you tomorrow night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night. So
I hope so. Thank you.
Take good care. Anybody else have anything they want to share? Don't feel like you have to, but yeah, go ahead, Pamela.
Yeah, the work with Betsy was unbelievable. She really took us from an arc of where we were as children to how we're feeling during the pandemic to how we see ourselves after the pandemic. And the stuff that came up for both Tori and myself was just incredible. I mean, we had about, I don't know, 5 minutes for each of the different prompts. And it was pretty mind blowing. And
That's so
where
nice
we
to
sort
hear.
of netted out, and it was different for everybody, but it was a sense of awakening, both from a personal standpoint and a global standpoint. It was so, I feel like a new person already.
Oh man,
Wow.
I love that. I wish we could have
Wow.
all been in both.
Thank you so much for, yeah.
It was extremely rich in conversation and having the opportunity to record some thoughts. And as Pam said, just really feel the thread going from childhood, how we, experience our childhood, to how we're experiencing the pandemic, to how we see ourselves with everything we're carrying with us from those parts of our lives towards the future.
Wow, thank you. That's really nice to
Betsy,
hear.
not that you can recreate this experience for all of us, but I'd love for you just to talk about the foundation of what you set out to do and what you guys did. Just and at some point, I'm sort of wishing I hadn't had two options. I sort of wish we'd all had the option to do both, and maybe the next time we will. So,
right, I could have fixed my shoulder and done writing prompts.
And
Well, thank you for those really kind words, and also for such deep and honest sharing. I think that the part of the exercise was supposed to be to get at your inner voice, and the assumption is that we have an arc of change within how we tell stories when we tap down in, and that these were 3 structured prompts that I'm happy to share with anyone who'd like to see them. And within each prompt, it sort of turns the dial like beads on a string, to create a building of from then to now. And one of the thoughts that I had shared was that the evolution of all of us, like from who we are as children until who we are now, that's when you read memoir, that's what you're doing. You're reading the arc of change within a person's particular lifetime. And it doesn't have to be linear. It can go back and forth, but just knowing that you've got this sort of a before and after, and a sense of becoming, and it's really all in us. We just need people to remind us to flesh it out. So.
Well, Betsy, if you would forward me or email me a little bit of your outline and the prompts, what I'll do for you guys is actually send it out in the next email that will be probably in your email box in the morning, reminding you about tomorrow night's experience too. So.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
So we are miraculously so close to the exact time that I said I would allow you to depart into the rest of your evening. And so in closing, I want to say 2 things before I thank you profusely and ask you all to say goodbye to each other. I want to please ask you to please join us tomorrow night for another really exciting night. I know that the debates are on. I know that there's a lot of other things you have to do, but tomorrow night is a panel of 3 sort of transformational leaders, I'll call them. And the topic is Encore Careers, stories of reinvention in your 50s and beyond. And it's not just necessarily for people who are looking for new jobs or still working hard. It's for people, reinvention in all ways, reigniting themselves. The breakout sessions that follow will be all about eliminating barriers and understanding your why, and to really sort of reveal your sense of purpose, and sort of, as I call it, remembering, reconnecting with who you are and what you want to do in the decades to come. So now everybody go to gallery view. And I've been on Zoom calls where they do this, and it is very nice. And I just think we can all just unmute yourselves if you can do that. And I see a few people still. Okay. And just wave and say goodbye. And thank you very much for being here.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Diana.
Bye.
Diana.
Thank you.
Good night.
Diana.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.